June 18th, San Francisco, or First City. The Golden Mountain is stranger, scarier, funner, sadder, and more wonderful than I ever imagined. Now that I am here, I will only use the American calendar. When we got off the ship, I thought it was the middle of the forest, except I could hear the ocean. Then I realized the tall poles were the masts of ships. I was surrounded by hundreds of empty boats. They jammed the harbor like fish in my village pond. I bet I could have walked from one deck to another across the bay. I didn't see any sailors. Instead, I saw laundry hanging from lines as if people were using the boats as houses. Then I saw one ship that literally had a house built on top of it. Maybe all the sailors had left their ships to find a gold too. Big, loud machines were pounding logs vertically into the mud a half-kilometer from shore. Real houses perched on top of logs that had already been driven in. Men and machines were filled in the shoreline to make more space. In some places, they weren't even bothering to move the ship, but were just filling the dirt around it. Blessing would have loved the machines. First City nestles at the foot of steep hills between the shore and hillsides. A few houses lie scattered on the slopes. Instead of building on the hills, they're expanding into the water. Though it's summer, the air is as chilly here as winter back at home. I have to stop now. They're calling for us to register. Later. Just got back. I don't want to forget a thing, so I'm going to write it all down, but there's so much. After all these months at sea, my legs are used to the motion of the waves. It was strange to stand on solid ground. My legs kept wanting to adjust for a moving platform. They still are. On shore, there was a Chinese man shouting for people from the 4 districts to come over to him. Another was ordering 3 districts' people to gather around him. Jem, Melon, Squashnose, and I stuck together as a group. Our own district belongs to the area known as the 4 districts. We tried to ask the clerk what he wanted, but he looked impatient and bored. He snapped at us to wait, and then we went back to bawling out his call over and over. When all the Chinese had left the ship, he mechanically began to recite a speech he must have given 100 times. It seemed that the Chinese in the land of the Golden Mountain have grouped together by areas and family clans, but primarily by areas. His headquarters will act as our clearinghouse for everything, temporary shelter, jobs, and transportation to the gold fields. I was grateful to hear that. The headquarters will also send our money and letters back home. He emphasized that we will not be allowed to go home until we have paid back everything that we owe. If we die before then we will see to it that our bones are shipped back for burial. I felt a little trapped. It sounds as if the only way out of here is to die, but then I reminded myself that Uncle is doing well. He will watch over me. Still later. Finally, real food. Rice, vegetables, and meat. At first, I wondered if I had lost track of time. Maybe it was a feast day. However, the people at the headquarters act like they have had it all the time. At home, only rich people can feast like this every day. To get to Chinatown, we had to pass through the American part of the city. San Francisco is like a big pot of stew with everything mixed in. People seem to live in anything they can. In many places, I saw tents of dirty canvas. Other buildings were wooden fronts with canvas sides and roofs that slapped up and down. The first good wind ought to blow most of them away. When I asked the clerk, he explained that in the past 3 years, 6 fires had destroyed the city. The latest was just a year ago. Then I saw some little cottages built out of iron. The clerk said that these were used to be a lot more. That there used to be a lot more. However, in the last fire, many people had stayed inside of them, thinking they were safe. Unfortunately, the flames turned the iron cottages into huge stoves. When the unlucky people tried to escape, they found the doors and windows had sealed tight and they were trapped. Most of them died. Finally, we came to the area that the fire must have skipped. Tall buildings of brick or wood rose several stories high. Through the open doorways came the sound of loud laughter. Jem tried to peek inside one of the place and got a hard-boiled egg in the face. He said they were gambling and drinking inside. Other wooden buildings were so new that the lumber smelled of freshly planed wood and shone like pale gold. Still others had already weathered gray, while a few had been painted white, the color of death. At first, I thought they were mausoleums for the dead, but I passed and I saw they were all stores. All of them were crammed with goods. In fact, the goods spilled out of some of them and were spilled onto the sidewalk. Then I saw tall stone walls rising from the dirt. Chinese were on scaffolding building the wall, so I thought we were in Chinatown. However, when we just kept on walking, I asked the clerk. He said it's an American building, but that the tall mountains shut off its province from the rest of the country. It had been cheaper to bring the stones from China. Unfortunately, the assembly instructions had been written in Chinese, so the American owner had hired a boatload of Chinese stone masons to put it together. It is to be the first city's first building of stone. I feel proud that it is Chinese who are doing that. Have to go. Jem and Melon need help reading the employment notices. Evening. San Francisco is a big stew of people. Every country in the world had dumped someone into the pot, and most of us are hurrying to the Golden Mountain. I've seen hair of almost every color, and faces and bodies stranger than the British man in Hong Kong. Many of them are Americans, but many others speak languages that don't sound like English. They wear every type of costume from elegant to cheap and plain. I also see people with skin the same color as mine. However, when I try to greet them, they don't understand me. I don't think they're speaking English either. Most of them are minors and I look as eager and new to us. The air is crackling with energy. I wish I could bottle it and sell it as tonic. Two things worry me though. Even if the Golden Mountain is pure gold, can there really be enough for all the miners I see? Almost all of them are armed with at least a pistol and a knife too. Why do they need such protection, and from what? Could the Golden Mountain be even more dangerous than the sea voyage here? I don't see how, and yet the others want to turn off the lights so they can sleep. Another wonder. The light is inside glass. The Americans call it kerosene. I don't see how they can sleep. I know I won't. June 19th. Another big meal. It was rice porridge and fried crullers like at home, but the porridge had big chunks of pork and preserved egg. I've never eaten so well. Blessing would definitely like to take part of this trip. The Chinese live in an area on a steep hill of San Francisco. The clerk was careful to tell us the Chinese and American names in case we got lost. In Chinese, it's the street of the people of Tang, and the Tang was a famous dynasty back in China 1,000 years ago. In English, it's called Sacramento Street. However, since there are thousands of Chinese living here now, Chinatown has begun to spill over into the other streets, especially DuPont. Like the American town, Chinatown is a mixture of wooden buildings and tents. The buildings are American style, but the wooden carvings and signboards in Chinese mark their owners. Above Chinatown, on an American street called Stockton, are a few wooden mansions where the richer Americans live. Our group is luckier than some of the Chinese who have to stay in tents. We're inside the headquarters itself. The smells make me feel right at home. Altar incense mixes with the smell of cooking. We are crowded into a room on the second floor. Though we are packed side to side, it seems spacious after the Excalibur. Later. Sad news. My 3 friends have decided to head for the southern mines. I tried to talk them into going to the northern ones where Uncle is. He's at some place called Big Bend, but the clerk said the weather will be better in the south. I will be alone again. When it was my own turn with the clerk, I had a bad scare. Naturally, Uncle had put my brother's name on the forms and not mine. That seemed to exasperate the clerk. He was the same bored man who met us on the wharf and guided us here. At first, I was afraid I was going to be sent back, but somehow I straightened things out. When my business was done, I held out Sonny's letter and asked him to send it to 2 streams. The clerk seized my hand instead. I got ready to punch him. Then he demanded to know how I'd gotten ink stains on my fingers. I told him I had been writing in my diary last night. It isn't always easy to wash off the ink. The clerk looked doubtful and insisted I take some dictation. My parents have taught me not to show off. However, that stung my pride. So I took the brush. When I dipped the brush into the ink and it gave off this wonderful perfume. I could still see parts of the picture of the carp on the side of the ink stick. It looked like ink a rich, important scholar would use. Of course, when I hesitated, the clerk thought that proved I was lying and couldn't write. That made me nervous again, and I told him I was just admiring the ink. He took on a smug look then. In Chinatown, he got only the best. He was glad to see that I could appreciate it. I noticed that the paper was good quality, too. So was the brush. When I asked him what he wanted me to write, he dictated a simple letter with basic words. It was easier than my teacher's tests at home, which had hard, complicated words from the classics. The clerk beamed when he looked at my dictation. I didn't know why. My letter is clear and legible, but hardly elegant. My teacher always shook his head when he graded my handwriting. Still later, the clerk came by to offer me a job. So many Chinese came in every day the headquarters is buried in paperwork. That's the literal truth. His little office was crammed with stacks of papers. For a moment, I was tempted to live in the first city and see all of its wonders every day, to make my living my writing and my reading. That all sounded like paradise. Then I remembered my uncle, so I refused politely. But the clerk wouldn't give up. He offered to write a letter. He said that if my uncle had any kindness in him, he would let me stay here. I told him, though, that my uncle had sent for me to help him pick the gold nuggets, the ones as big as melons. He just laughed. When I learned my lesson, and if I survived, there would be a job waiting for me, he said. I have this funny feeling in my stomach again. I have to admit, it's a bit odd. Why would someone sit cooped up in a tiny office if there's such big nuggets to be scooped up? Maybe it won't be as easy as Uncle told me. When he left, I went down to the little altar in the headquarters. There were some incense sticks in a cup. I took out one of them and lit it from a candle. Then I set it up in a cup of sand and said a prayer for Sonny. I burned some incense for me.